Today, we'll look at 20 nostalgic sandwiches that once played a big role in family meals, but gradually faded away. Each one has its own story and flavor, capturing a different moment in American culinary history. Number 1. Deviled ham. Pineapple sandwich. During the 1930s and 1940s, deviled ham provided a punchy alternative to sliced meats, thanks to its tangy seasonings and budget-friendly packaging. Post-war fascination with canned pineapple gave rise to a sweet and savory marriage that some mid-century Americans found downright exciting. Spread deviled ham on white bread, top it with a syrupy pineapple ring, and you have a flavor collision that hit home with baby boomers seeking novelty. This sandwich appeared in bright pamphlets promising tropical flair in an era hungry for convenience. By the 1960s and 1970s, however, consumers started gravitating toward fresher produce and simplified meat selections. Deviled ham, seen as overly processed, lost its place on the grocery list, while canned pineapple pivoted to more dessert-oriented roles. The once popular deviled ham pineapple sandwich soon faded from average lunchboxes, living on mainly in vintage recipe clippings and in the memories of those who recall daydreaming about island getaways via a can of fruit. Number 2. Bologna Marshmallow Fluff Sandwich. Few mid-century pairings raise eyebrows quite like combining salty bologna with sticky marshmallow fluff. During the 1950s, Fluff was marketed as a whimsical topping for sweets, whereas bologna stood as a cheap lunchtime mainstay. Somehow, the two ended up on soft white bread, celebrated by certain local recipe pamphlets that touted sweet and salty surprises. Baby boomers recall encountering this strange duo at birthday parties or potluck tables. Yet, as the 1960s progressed, parents grew wary of sugar-packed fluff, and bologna faced competition from leaner deli cuts. By the 1970s and 1980s, children were bombarded with new snack options, from fruit-flavored snacks to savory lunch kits, leaving the Bologna marshmallow fluff sandwich behind. Today, it resurfaces occasionally as an internet curiosity, an emblem of carefree experimentation from a time when American kitchens gave nearly any flavor combination a whirl. Number 3. Sardine Mustard Mash Sandwich. Sardines supplied an affordable protein punch in the 1930s and 1940s, especially when families needed shelf-stable items. Mashing them with spicy mustard, onions, or pickles delivered a pungent spread that frugal home cooks appreciated. Slathered on sliced bread, the sardine mustard mash sandwich satisfied appetites while dividing opinions over its powerful aroma. Even so, baby boomers recall parents praising its nutritional value and briny charm. By the 1960s, new seafood choices, like tuna and salmon, offered milder flavors, and improved transportation methods meant families had more fresh fish alternatives. As a result, sardines fell out of favor with younger eaters who found their fishy intensity off-putting. By the 1970s and 1980s, the sandwich all but vanished from mainstream lunchboxes, overshadowed by the dominance of tuna salad. A handful of retro recipe enthusiasts still experiment with sardine spreads, but for most, its glory days as a kitchen staple lie firmly in the past. Number 4. Peanut Butter Pickle Relish Sandwich. Peanut butter soared to popularity in the early 20th century, cementing its status as a quick source of protein for budget-minded families. Meanwhile, pickle relish, whether sweet or dill, embodied zesty Americana. A subset of mid-century cooks decided to unite these two, claiming the vinegary tang spiked the peanut butter's creamy richness. The peanut butter pickle relish sandwich popped up in newspapers during the 1940s and 1950s as a daring lunch idea, intriguing or repelling baby boomers alike. Come the 1960s, PB&J reigned supreme, and relish-laden peanut butter lost ground to jam-sweet comfort. By the 1970s and 1980s, store shelves brimmed with new condiments, further diluting interest in this tangy oddity. Today, it remains a quirky footnote in America's sandwich history, sometimes revived in blogs highlighting unusual retro eats but rarely returning to everyday family tables. Number 5, chicken a la king, spread sandwich. Traditional chicken a la king, brimming with cream sauce, vegetables, and pimentos, once signaled culinary elegance in the 1950s. Turning those leftovers into a spread for bread was seen as clever and decadent, a suggestion found in glossy, home-cooking magazines. Many baby boomers remember luncheons where chicken a la king spread sandwiches sat next to fruit cups and gelatin molds. However, the late 1960s ushered in lighter salads and fresh produce, dulling the appeal of cream-heavy fillings. By the 1970s and 1980s, global influences encouraged bolder flavors and simpler ingredients. Chicken a la king, with its rich sauce, started feeling too fussy in a culture gravitating toward convenience and healthfulness. Although it lingers in some vintage recipe books, the sandwich application rarely surfaces, edged out by streamlined chicken salad featuring crisp celery and modern dressings. Number 6, olive loaf mustard sandwich. Olive loaf, a processed meat flecked with green olives, captured the eye in 1950s meat counters for its colorful interior. The promise of an affordable yet fancy-looking deli slice drew parents seeking economical lunches for baby boomer households. Slathering mustard onto white bread, then topping it with olive loaf, created a tangy punch that old food ads celebrated as a visual and gustatory adventure. But as the 1960s and 1970s progressed, concerns about preservatives and sodium grew. More appetizing and health-forward options like turkey or lean roast beef chipped away at olive loaf's popularity. By the 1980s, mainstream grocery shoppers bypassed it in favor of simpler cold cuts with fewer artificial flavorings. Modern families, influenced by newly available produce and leaner proteins, moved on. The olive loaf mustard sandwich thus took its place as a mid-century artifact, often remembered with mild nostalgia, seldom revived in contemporary diets. Number 7, liverwurst mayo, onion sandwich. Liverwurst formed part of many Depression-era diets, offering an inexpensive spread or slice of organ meat. By the 1940s and 1950s, slapping a circle of liverwurst onto bread with mayo and raw onion was a normal sight at home or in lunch counters. Immigrant traditions, particularly German or Eastern European, boosted its presence. Baby boomers who grew up around these flavors might have fond or reluctant memories of the strong scent. As the 1960s and 1970s brought an explosion of processed meats, younger palates gravitated to less aggressive options like bologna, turkey, or ham. By the 1980s, heightened cholesterol worries further dampened liverwurst's popularity. Today, it's mostly confined to specialty delis, remembered as a robust old-world staple from an era that embraced every bit of the animal and didn't shy away from pungent flavors. Number 8, banana mayo sandwich. Banana mayo sandwiches baffled many from the get-go, yet found fans through the mid-1900s in regions that praised bananas as a daily fruit and mayonnaise as the universal binder. Older recipe columns from the 1940s and 1950s occasionally touted its sweet-tart simplicity, appealing to baby boomers with a taste for unique combos. Some spread a thin layer of mayonnaise on white bread, laid down sliced bananas, and sprinkled a little sugar or cinnamon. As jam and peanut butter conquered school lunchboxes in the 1960s, banana mayo's quirkiness faded. Additionally, by the 1970s and 1980s, sugary cereals and fruit snacks seduced children, making a plain fruit and mayo sandwich seem obsolete. While it lingers as a curiosity in certain southern states or older households, the banana mayo sandwich largely receded into nostalgic recollections, sometimes revived on social media lists of unusual vintage lunches. Number 9, Spam, pineapple ring sandwich. Spam, introduced in the late 1930s, soared during wartime shortages and remained beloved into the 1950s. Pineapple, aggressively marketed as a tropical treat, often came canned in syrup. Slicing a ring of pineapple onto a fried slab of Spam, then nestling it in bread, formed a sweet and salty collision that baby boomers encountered at school functions, scout jamborees, or quick family dinners. By the 1960s and 1970s, the allure of exotic pineapple faded as fresh fruit became more common, and Spam garnered criticism for its high sodium content. Newer recipes featuring less processed meats captured mainstream attention. By the 1980s, concerns over preservatives and shifting culinary sensibilities nearly relegated Spam pineapple ring sandwiches to Hawaiian-themed parties or niche gatherings. Though Spam continues to have a foothold in certain regional cuisines, its pineapple-laden sandwich form remains a mid-century relic that resurfaces mainly for retro-themed nostalgia. Number 10, head cheese mustard sandwich. Head cheese, essentially meat scraps suspended in gelatin, rose from resourceful old-world cooking traditions. In the 1940s, when nose-to-tail eating was ordinary, slicing head cheese onto rye or white bread with a smear of mustard was standard fare in households that refused to waste any part of the animal. Baby boomers in the 1950s might recall seeing translucent, jiggly slices in the fridge, next to more mainstream cold cuts. As groceries in the 1960s and 1970s emphasized neatly packaged deli meats, many younger consumers found head cheese visually off-putting. By the 1980s, it remained mostly in ethnic markets or among older cooks who clung to tradition. The head cheese mustard sandwich slipped from everyday lunch rotations, overshadowed by modern foods that boasted uniform textures and mild, easily accepted flavors. Number 11, Scrapple gravy sandwich. Scrapple, pork scraps cooked with cornmeal, dates to colonial-era frugality. Frying it into slices was common in the 1930s and 1940s for breakfast, and leftovers might be smothered in gravy for a heartier lunch sandwich. Baby boomers in mid-Atlantic states often associate it with comforting weekend mornings, though outsiders might have balked at its mushy interior. With rising prosperity in the 1960s and 1970s, many families turned to mainstream cuts like pork chops or bacon, leaving organ and scrap dishes behind. Meanwhile, McDonald's and other fast food spots overshadowed home-fried Scrapple for quick meals. By the 1980s, few outside rural communities or regional diners kept the Scrapple gravy sandwich alive. It now stands as a niche comfort food, cherished by those who value time-honored, no-waste cooking, but rarely appearing on the national lunch scene. Number 12, Bologna grape jelly sandwich. Bologna occupied prime real estate in the mid-century lunchbox, while grape jelly typically belonged alongside peanut butter. Yet some households in the 1950s ventured to pair the two, betting on the sweet-savory synergy. Kids either loved or despised the sugary coating on salty bologna slices. Advertisements seldom highlighted this mix, so it relied mainly on word of mouth or local cookbook mentions. By the 1960s, with myriad new jam flavors and lunch meat varieties, families tended to pick safer or more widely accepted combos. The 1970s and 1980s favored simpler bologna and mustard sandwiches, leaving the grape jelly edition behind. Today, it occasionally stirs conversation as one of those odd vintage lunches that confirm older generations weren't afraid of adventurous, if not questionable, taste pairings. Number 13, egg olive salad sandwich. Egg salad, eggs, mayo, maybe a little mustard, had reigned supreme for decades, but the 1950s introduced a twist, adding green olives. The briny punch challenged the traditional mildness of egg salad, prompting praise in some recipe columns for delivering an elevated tang. Baby boomers remember it popping up at picnics or afternoon teas, often divided on whether olives improved or ruined the classic. As the 1960s and 1970s rolled out ever more sandwich innovations, from elaborate club stacks to grilled cheese variations, the olive-laced version failed to sustain mass appeal. By the 1980s, subtle egg salads or mayonnaise-based spreads loaded with fresh vegetables grabbed attention. Egg olive salad sandwiches thus became a memory of mid-century resourcefulness, overshadowed by simpler, more crowd-pleasing renditions. Number 14, pineapple cream cheese sandwich. Pineapple cream cheese, where crushed pineapple got blended with softened cream cheese, showed up in countless 1950s recipe brochures. These pastel-hued spreads were touted for luncheons, bridge parties, or whenever a homemaker wanted something festive without labor. Baby boomers might recall pinkish or pale yellow sandwiches sliced diagonally on a tray. Yet, as fruit packaging improved in the 1960s, many decided they preferred fresh pineapple to the syrup-laden canned style. Cream cheese also found new roles like cheesecake or dips, rendering the sweet-on-white bread formula less appealing. By the 1970s and 1980s, a surge of Tangier or more robust spreads sidelined the sugary, mild combos that once reigned. The pineapple cream cheese sandwich thus quietly slipped from mainstream gatherings, now remembered more for its kitschy aesthetic than for widespread culinary legacy. Number 15, deviled egg raisin spread sandwich. The concept of deviled eggs, zest from mustard, mayo, and spices, usually conjures up images of hors d'oeuvres, not raisins. Still, 1950s party cookbooks occasionally suggested folding chopped raisins into the yolk mix for a sweet counterpart to the tang. This combination, then smeared between sandwich bread, intrigued some hosts who wanted to stand out at baby showers or ladies' luncheons. Baby boomers recall taste testing these finger sandwiches with reactions ranging from fascination to distaste. As the 1960s introduced more international inspiration and the 1970s veered away from ultra-sweet novelty appetizers, raisins and deviled eggs found fewer fans. By the 1980s, it was relegated to the realm of vintage oddities, overshadowed by simpler deviled egg recipes or trendy new dips and spreads. For most modern palates, deviled egg raisin spread remains a curious relic from the era of elaborate tea parties. Number 16, Bologna radish salad sandwich. Mid-century American gardens commonly sprouted radishes, easy to grow for a peppery snack. Bologna, mass-produced and cheap, fueled countless lunches. Some 1950s homemakers diced both radishes and bologna into a chunky salad, binding it with mayonnaise. The Bologna radish salad sandwich packed a crunchy lunch punch, although it never reached national fame. Once the 1960s and 1970s expanded the world of deli meats, families turned to turkey, roast beef, or ham, viewing bologna as less healthy. Radish, meanwhile, became a garnish for fresh salads rather than a star in mayo-laden spreads. By the 1980s, most households found this combination too humble and odd compared to the shiny new processed foods filling supermarket aisles. It lingers in certain rural recipe archives, a time capsule of when homegrown radishes spiced up an otherwise mundane budget meat. Number 17, Braunschweiger apple chutney sandwich. Braunschweiger, akin to liverwurst, delivered a potent, earthy taste reminiscent of old European sausages. Apple chutney, equal parts sweet, sour, and spiced, proved a surprisingly complementary partner. Families in the 1940s and 1950s who enjoyed bolder flavors frequently stacked slices of Braunschweiger with dollops of homemade chutney for a punchy bite. Baby boomers who grew up around it sometimes remember the intense aroma, while many children found it too grown up. Come the 1960s, gentler cold cuts nudged aside organ-based sausages. Meanwhile, the 1970s and 1980s saw store-bought jams and jellies overshadow home-brewed chutneys. By then, few had the patience, or palate, for this strongly flavored sandwich. Today, it survives in niche deli counters and among dedicated fans of old-world cuisine, but remains absent from the modern mainstream lunch table. Number 18, meatloaf pineapple jelly sandwich. Meatloaf, an American dinner mainstay in the 1950s, often spawned plenty of leftovers. Some creative households layered cold slices with pineapple jelly, apparently seeking a fruit-glazed effect without firing up the oven. This sweet-savory approach mirrored that seen in hams or certain Southern barbecue sauces. Baby boomers may remember it primarily from clean out the fridge weekends. But by the 1960s and 1970s, as families embraced Tangier condiments like ketchup or barbecue sauce, pineapple jelly felt old-fashioned. The 1980s thrust an even broader range of store-bought sauces into the spotlight, making this sugary, preserved sandwich fade away. The meatloaf pineapple jelly sandwich lives on as an odd anecdote from a time when American cooks brazenly tested fruit spreads with meats, celebrating thrifty resourcefulness and a sweet tooth in one messy bite. Number 19, tuna carrot slaw sandwich. Tuna salad was the foundation of innumerable lunches by the 1950s, seen as a practical, healthy, and easily stored protein. Shredded carrots found their way into the mix whenever families wanted extra crunch or to stretch ingredients further. In the 1960s, tuna carrot slaw added color and nutrients at a time when processed foods often overshadowed vegetables. Baby boomers recall seeing it at school lunch counters or in homemade packed lunches, though it never achieved the iconic status of standard tuna salad. As produce options expanded in the 1970s and 1980s, families started experimenting with everything from sprouts to fancy mustards, rendering the humble carrot addition less appealing. Over time, the simplicity of celery or onion overshadowed bright orange carrots in tuna salad. The tuna carrot slaw sandwich quietly disappeared as the world of sandwich fillings modernized around fresher, more varied ingredients. Number 20, Bologna egg ketchup sandwich. Frying a slice of bologna alongside an egg, then slicking it with ketchup on bread, felt like a thrifty triumph in the 1950s. The bologna egg combo offered a filling breakfast-lunch crossover, while ketchup added sweetness and tang to an otherwise salty bite. Baby boomers might recall grabbing one of these sandwiches before heading to school or seeing relatives whip them up for a quick midday meal. But by the 1960s and 1970s, dedicated breakfast sausage and bacon selections outcompeted bologna, and the idea of slathering ketchup on eggs was itself polarizing. Increasingly, children of the late 1970s and 1980s turned to cereals, toaster pastries, or commercially available egg sandwiches for morning fuel. Thus, the bologna egg ketchup sandwich slipped out of mainstream homes, living on primarily in nostalgic retellings of a simpler, if greasier, time at the kitchen table. It now remains a reminder of American families' resourceful efforts to deliver protein-laden meals on a tight budget, embracing convenience well before fast food chains standardized the breakfast sandwich market.